Welcome to Sleepy Science Student, where we explore the wonders of science one gentle thought at a time. Tonight, we're going on a slow, peaceful journey into the most fascinating organ in your body, the human brain. It's a 3-pound universe of neurons and connections, a soft, wet computer that somehow creates your thoughts, your memories, your dreams, and your sense of who you are. I hope this video isn't too interesting. Though, if it does happen to keep you awake, at least you'll be learning something remarkable about the very thing doing the learning. Not the worst way to spend a sleepless night. Before we drift into the world of neurons and synapses together, I'd love it if you gave this video a like and maybe even subscribed if you haven't already. It really helps this sleepy little channel grow and means more curious minds can find their way here to learn and rest. I'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Are you tuning in from a cozy bed in Melbourne at 2 in the morning, or listening from a couch in Chicago at 9 in the evening while folding laundry you've been avoiding all week? Let me know in the comments. It's always such a joy to see the sleepy science community scattered gently across the globe. Now, settle in. Get comfortable. You don't need to remember any of this. You don't need to take notes or stay alert. Just let the words wash over you like a warm bath on a winter evening. Let your shoulders relax. Slow down your breathing. And as we begin this gentle voyage into the landscape of your mind, remember this video is for educational and relaxation purposes only. It's not intended as medical advice, neurological consultation, or a replacement for talking to an actual doctor, though it might make your thoughts feel pleasantly soft and distant. Ready? The brain in your hands. Let's start with something simple, something you can picture. Imagine holding a brain in your hands, not a real one, of course. That would be rather unsettling at bedtime. But imagine the weight of it. About 3 pounds, roughly the weight of a large grapefruit or a small laptop. Soft, wrinkled, the color of pale clay or vanilla pudding. It doesn't look like much, does it? And yet this unremarkable lump of tissue is reading these words right now, making sense of symbols on a screen, perhaps wondering what's for breakfast tomorrow, and simultaneously keeping your heart beating without you having to think about it. The brain is both the simplest and most complex thing we know. Simple, because at its core, it's just cells. Billions of them, certainly, but cells nonetheless. Neurons, they're called. And they do something elegant and straightforward. They pass signals to each other, like a cosmic game of telephone played at lightning speed. One neuron gets excited and tells its neighbors, who tell their neighbors, and somehow out of this electrical gossip emerges thought, emotion, consciousness itself. But here's where things get curious. You'd think that with roughly 86 billion neurons in the average human brain, we'd have figured out how it all works by now. We haven't. Not even close. It's a bit like trying to understand a novel by examining each letter individually. You can catalogue every A and B and C, count them, map where they appear, but that tells you nothing about the story being told. The brain you're imagining in your hands right now, or perhaps you've stopped imagining it, which is fine, perfectly fine, is using about 20 watts of power. That's less than most light bulbs. 20 watts to run your entire existence, to process everything you see and hear and feel, to store decades of memories, to dream, to wonder, to love. Your laptop uses far more energy and can't even write a decent poem. We like to call the brain a computer, and in some ways that's not wrong. It processes information, it has inputs and outputs, it stores data, but it's also nothing like a computer. Computers are precise, binary, predictable. Brains are messy, analog, gloriously unpredictable. A computer does exactly what you tell it to do. A brain mishears you, forgets what you said 3 seconds ago, and somehow still manages to understand what you meant rather than what you said. Let's pause for a moment and appreciate this. Right now, as you lie there, your brain is filtering through millions of sensory inputs, deciding what deserves your attention and what can be safely ignored. The feeling of fabric against your skin, the ambient sound of wherever you are, the temperature, the light, all of it streaming in, most of it dismissed as unimportant. Your brain is a bouncer at an exclusive club, and consciousness is the VIP section. Only the interesting stuff gets through. This selective attention is happening without any effort from you. You didn't decide to filter out the feeling of your tongue in your mouth, but now that I've mentioned it, you're probably aware of it. Sorry about that. Your brain was kindly ignoring it until I ruined everything. That's the brain's job, though, to notice what matters and gently set aside what doesn't. If you were aware of everything all at once, you'd go mad in seconds. The world is too much. Your brain protects you from it by letting you experience reality in manageable, carefully curated sips. The structure we're exploring tonight evolved over hundreds of millions of years. The human brain didn't spring into existence fully formed. It's more like a house that's been renovated many times, with new wings added, old rooms repurposed, and original foundations still visible if you know where to look. Deep inside your brain, beneath all the fancy thinking parts, there are structures that would look familiar to a lizard. Seriously, you have a lizard brain in there, wrapped in a mammal brain, wrapped in a human brain. It's evolutionary layering, like geological strata made of neurons. This layered architecture means that sometimes different parts of your brain want different things. The old lizard parts want you to eat, sleep, and avoid danger. The mammal parts want social connection and emotional bonding. The new human parts want to understand quantum mechanics and write poetry. Usually they work together reasonably well, but not always. That's why you might rationally know that the spider in the corner is harmless, while simultaneously feeling an overwhelming urge to flee. Ancient brain meets modern brain. An ancient brain doesn't care about your logic, but we're getting ahead of ourselves, drifting into complexity before we've established the foundations. Let's slow down. Take a breath. We have hours ahead of us and there's no rush. The brain isn't going anywhere. Well, yours isn't. It's quite literally trapped in your skull, floating in cerebrospinal fluid, cushioned and protected, a few inches behind your eyes and between your ears. It's dark in there, completely dark. Your brain has never seen light, never will, and yet somehow it constructs this vivid, colourful experience of the world from electrical signals and chemical reactions. That might be the most remarkable thing of all. Everything you've ever seen, every sunset, every face, every word on a page, is a story your brain tells itself based on second-hand information. The light hits your retinas, gets converted to electrical pulses, travels along the optic nerve, and gets reconstructed somewhere in the back of your brain as vision. You're not seeing the world directly. You're seeing your brain's best guess about what's out there, a simulation so seamless you never question it. Except now, maybe you are questioning it, which is your brain questioning itself, which is quite a trick when you think about it. So there's our starting point. A 3-pound organ, 86 billion neurons, 20 watts of power, living in darkness, creating light. Simple and complex, ordinary and impossible. Let's explore it together, gently, one fascinating layer at a time. Now we move deeper into the microscopic world where thought begins. The neuron. If the brain is a city, neurons are the citizens, each one a tiny entity with its own life, its own purpose, its own way of communicating with its neighbours. They're the fundamental units of brain function, the letters in the novel we talked about earlier. A neuron doesn't look like much under a microscope. It has a body like any cell, but stretching out from that body are branches. Dendrites, they're called, like a tree spreading its limbs to catch sunlight. Except neurons aren't catching sunlight. They're catching signals from other neurons. The dendrites reach out, waiting to be touched by information. And at the other end of the neuron, there's usually one long projection called an axon, a wire that can be microscopically short or surprisingly long. Some axons stretch from your spinal cord all the way down to your toes, a journey of several feet for a single cell. The way neurons talk to each other is elegant in its simplicity. When a neuron gets excited enough, when it receives enough signals from its neighbours, it fires. That's the technical term, though it sounds more dramatic than it is. Firing just means that an electrical pulse travels down the axon, a wave of charged particles rushing from one end to the other in a tiny fraction of a second. It's like dominoes falling, except the dominoes immediately stand back up, ready to fall again. But here's the curious part. The electrical pulse doesn't actually jump from one neuron to the next. There's a gap, a tiny space called a synapse, and electricity can't cross it. So the neuron does something clever. When the electrical pulse reaches the end of the axon, it triggers the release of chemicals, neurotransmitters, that float across the gap and land on the next neuron like tiny molecular letters in bottles. The receiving neuron reads these chemical messages, and if enough of them arrive, it fires too, passing the signal along. It's a bit like a game of telephone played simultaneously by billions of participants, except instead of words, they're passing electrical impulses and chemical signals. And instead of getting garbled, the messages somehow remain coherent enough to produce thought, memory, and consciousness, which, when you think about it, is absurdly unlikely, and yet happens constantly, reliably, in your skull right now. These neurotransmitters come in different flavors. Some are excitatory. They make the next neuron more likely to fire. Some are inhibitory. They tell the next neuron to calm down, to stay quiet. The brain is a constant balancing act between excitement and inhibition, between signals that say go and signals that say stop. Too much excitement, and you have a seizure, your neurons firing in chaotic synchrony. Too much inhibition, and you have unconsciousness, your neurons falling silent. The sweet spot in the middle is where you live, where thought happens. One of the most famous neurotransmitters is dopamine. You've probably heard of it, often in the context of pleasure and reward. When something good happens, you eat chocolate, you win a game, you receive a compliment. Dopamine gets released in certain parts of your brain, and that release feels nice. It's the brain's way of saying, do that again. Dopamine isn't pleasure itself exactly. It's more like anticipation, motivation, the feeling that something good might happen. It's what makes you check your phone for messages, what makes you crave just one more episode, what makes rats press levers and humans scroll through social media. Another important neurotransmitter is serotonin, which does many things, but is often associated with mood and well-being. Low serotonin levels are linked to depression, though the relationship is more complicated than that. Many antidepressant medications work by increasing serotonin availability in the brain, though exactly how this helps remains somewhat mysterious. The brain doesn't give up its secrets easily. Then there's GABA, the brain's main inhibitory neurotransmitter, the one that tells neurons to be quiet, to settle down. GABA is what allows you to focus, to filter out distractions, to not be overwhelmed by every sensory input. Many anti-anxiety medications work by enhancing GABA's effects, essentially turning down the volume on an overactive brain. And if you've ever had a drink of alcohol, you've experienced GABA enhancement. Alcohol increases GABA activity, which is why it makes you feel relaxed, and, in larger amounts, why it impairs your coordination and judgment. Take a breath. Let these concepts settle. You don't need to memorize the names of neurotransmitters. You don't need to remember what each one does. Just let the wonder of it wash over you. This intricate chemical dance happening in your brain every moment, invisible, automatic, essential. The speed at which all this happens is remarkable. Some neurons can fire hundreds of times per second. Signals can travel down an axon at over 200 miles per hour in the fastest neurons, though most are considerably slower, shuffling along at a leisurely few miles per hour. Even at these speeds, the brain manages to process information fast enough that you can catch a ball, have a conversation, read these words without conscious effort. It's all happening in the background, in the dark, in the soft, wet tissue behind your eyes. And here's something that might keep you awake if you think about it too hard, so don't think about it too hard. Every thought you've ever had, every memory, every emotion, every dream, All of it is just neurons firing in patterns. There's nothing else. No magic, no soul stuff, no ghost in the machine. Just 86 billion neurons passing signals to each other in the darkness of your skull, and somehow that creates you. The colors you see, the music you hear, the love you feel, all of it is electricity and chemistry, which is either deeply unsettling or profoundly beautiful, depending on how you look at it. Perhaps both. The patterns matter more than the individual firings. A single neuron firing means nothing. It's just noise. But when thousands or millions of neurons fire together in specific patterns, suddenly you have a thought, a memory, a sensation. It's like pixels on a screen. One pixel is meaningless, but arrange millions of them correctly, and you have a face, a landscape, a story. The brain is pixels made of neurons, painting experience moment by moment. We'll explore more about how these patterns create specific experiences later. For now, just appreciate the foundation we've laid. Neurons, synapses, electrical pulses, chemical messages, the alphabet of thought, simple components, complex result. That's the brain's magic trick. Not that consciousness emerges from neurons, but that it emerges from something so simple as neurons passing signals. It shouldn't work, but it does. You're proof of it. Let's talk about structure now, about the brain's geography. If we were to slice your brain in half from front to back, which we won't, don't worry, we'd see distinct regions, each with its own texture, its own appearance, its own responsibilities. The brain isn't a uniform blob. It's a neighborhood of specialized districts, each handling different aspects of your mental life. The largest, most obvious structure is the cerebrum, the wrinkled outer part that most people picture when they think brain. Those wrinkles aren't just for show. They're the brain's way of fitting more surface area into your skull. If you smoothed out all those folds, the cerebrum would be about the size of a large pizza, which wouldn't fit in your head very nicely. So evolution crumpled it up like a piece of paper, creating gyri, the bumps, and sulci, the grooves. More surface area means more neurons, means more processing power, all packed into a space roughly the size of a small cantaloupe. The cerebrum is divided into two hemispheres, left and right, connected by a thick bundle of nerve fibers called the corpus callosum. You've probably heard that the left brain is logical and the right brain is creative, that some people are left-brained and others right-brained. That's mostly nonsense, a pop psychology myth that sounds good but isn't supported by neuroscience. Both hemispheres work together on virtually every task. True, they have some specializations. Language is usually processed more on the left, spatial awareness more on the right, but the idea that you're predominantly one or the other is about as scientific as astrology. Each hemisphere is divided into 4 lobes, named after the skull bones they sit beneath. At the very front, you have the frontal lobes, the part that makes you most human. This is where your personality lives, where you plan for the future, where you make decisions and exercise self-control. Damage to the frontal lobes can change who you are. There was a famous case in 1848 of a railroad worker named Phineas Gage, who survived having an iron rod blown through his frontal lobe. He lived, but his personality changed dramatically. He became impulsive, crude, unable to stick to plans. His friends said he was no longer Gage. The lesson was clear. You are your brain, and specifically, you are your frontal lobes. Just behind the frontal lobes, across a deep groove, are the parietal lobes. These process sensory information from your body, creating your sense of touch, temperature, pain. They also handle spatial awareness, your sense of where your body is in space, how to navigate through the world without bumping into things. When you reach for a glass without looking, your parietal lobes are doing the calculations, integrating vision and touch and proprioception into smooth, coordinated movement. At the back of your brain, above the nape of your neck, are the occipital lobes. This is your visual cortex, where the simple electrical signals from your eyes become the rich, detailed, three-dimensional movie of the world you experience. Damage to the occipital lobes can cause blindness, even though your eyes work perfectly fine. Your eyes might capture the image, but your brain can't process it, so you see nothing. Vision isn't in your eyes, it's in your brain. Your eyes are just cameras. The occipital lobes are the screen. On the sides of your brain, roughly behind your temples, are the temporal lobes. These do many things, but they're particularly important for processing sound and for memory. Deep within the temporal lobe sits a structure called the hippocampus. Yes, named after a seahorse, because someone thought it looked like one. And this is one of the most crucial areas for forming new memories. Without your hippocampus, you could still access old memories, but you couldn't create new ones. You'd be stuck in an eternal present, each moment fresh and disconnected from the last. It's a condition that actually occurs, called anterograde amnesia, and it's as terrifying as it sounds. Let's pause here and breathe. Take a moment to appreciate that these four lobes, frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal, are working together seamlessly right now to allow you to read, to understand, to remember, to think about thinking. It's all happening without any conscious oversight from you. You don't have to tell your occipital lobes to process these words. You don't have to ask your temporal lobes to understand their meaning. It just happens, automatic and effortless, a gift from 3 billion years of evolution. Beneath the cerebrum, tucked under the back of the brain, sits the cerebellum. It looks like a smaller, more tightly folded version of the cerebrum, and for a long time, scientists thought it was mainly for motor control, for coordinating movement. It's true that damage to the cerebellum makes you clumsy, makes your movements jerky and imprecise. But recent research suggests the cerebellum does much more. It might be involved in thinking, in language, in emotion. The cerebellum contains more than half of all the neurons in your brain, which seems like a lot for a structure supposedly just coordinating movement. We're still figuring out what it all does. The brain keeps its secrets. Even deeper, at the very base of the brain where it connects to the spinal cord, is the brainstem. This is the part that keeps you alive without any conscious thought. It regulates your heartbeat, your breathing, your blood pressure. You could lose your entire cerebrum, all your memories, your personality, your thoughts, and your brainstem would keep your body running. That's why brainstem death is considered true death in medicine, even if the heart is still beating. The brainstem is the difference between being alive and being a living body. Around and among these major structures are dozens of smaller ones, each with specialized functions. The thalamus, a relay station that processes and forwards sensory information. The hypothalamus, tiny but mighty, regulating hunger, thirst, body temperature, and the release of hormones. The amygdala, almond-shaped and ancient, processing fear and emotional memory. The basal ganglia, involved in movement and reward. The list goes on, each structure a piece of the puzzle, each one necessary but not sufficient for consciousness. It's tempting to think of these regions as modules, like apps on a phone, each doing one specific thing. That's not quite right. The brain is more interconnected than that. Different regions work together, their boundaries blurrier than our neat anatomical labels suggest. When you recognize a friend's face, your temporal lobes process who they are. Your amygdala adds emotional context. Your frontal lobes bring up memories of past interactions. Your motor cortex prepares to smile. All of this happens in milliseconds, all of it coordinated through billions of connections we're only beginning to map. And here's the truly curious thing. This geography, this map of the brain, is roughly the same in everyone. Your frontal lobes are where mine are. Your hippocampus looks like my hippocampus. And yet, despite this structural similarity, your thoughts are yours alone. Your memories are unique. Your personality is distinct. The same architecture, different contents. It's like how every computer runs the same hardware, but displays different screens, stores different files, performs different functions depending on the software installed. Except the brain doesn't have software installed from outside. It programs itself through experience, through learning, through living. We'll explore that self-programming more deeply when we talk about neuroplasticity. For now, rest in the knowledge that you've learned the basic geography of your own brain. The landscape of thought, mapped and named, present and functioning 3 inches behind your eyes, slowly, gently, always working. Now that we know where things are, let's explore how information actually moves through this landscape. When something happens in the world, let's say you hear a dog bark, what exactly happens in your brain? First, the sound waves hit your eardrums, causing them to vibrate. These vibrations get converted into electrical signals by tiny hair cells in your inner ear, each one tuned to a specific frequency like strings on a guitar. The signals travel along the auditory nerve to your brainstem, then to your thalamus, that relay station we mentioned earlier. The thalamus is like a switchboard operator directing sensory information to the appropriate parts of the cortex for processing. In this case, the auditory information gets sent to your primary auditory cortex, located in your temporal lobes. Here, the brain begins to decode the sound. It's not just hearing a noise, it's analyzing pitch, volume, rhythm, timbre. Neurons that respond to specific frequencies fire, creating a pattern that represents the sound. This pattern gets compared to stored patterns in your memory. Does it match anything you've heard before? Your brain searches quickly, effortlessly. Yes, it's a bark. You've heard thousands of barks in your life, and your temporal lobes have a bark template stored somewhere in their billions of connections. Match found. But the brain doesn't stop there. It sends the information forward to other regions. Is the bark close or far? Threatening or friendly? Should you pay attention to it? Your amygdala gets involved, that ancient almond-shaped structure that processes emotional salience. If you were once bitten by a dog, your amygdala might flag this bark as potentially dangerous, sending signals that increase your heart rate, sharpen your attention, prepare you for action. If you're a dog lover who grew up with pets, your amygdala might tag it as neutral or even pleasant. Same sound, different emotional context, different response. Meanwhile, your frontal lobes are integrating this information with everything else that's happening. Are you busy with something important? Then maybe the bark gets filed away as background noise. Are you expecting a delivery and worried about your dog disturbing the neighbors? Then the bark becomes immediately relevant, worthy of action. Your frontal lobes act as executive control, deciding what deserves your limited attention and what can be ignored. All of this happens in a few hundred milliseconds, from sound wave to recognized bark, to emotional evaluation, to conscious awareness, to decision to act or not act, all of it unfolding faster than you can blink. And it's happening constantly, for every sensory input, every moment of every day. Your brain is processing millions of bits of information, most of it automatically, unconsciously, showing you only the tiny fraction that matters. This flow of information isn't one way. It's not just bottom-up, from senses to perception to action. There's also top-down processing, where your expectations, your memories, your current goals all influence what you perceive. Your brain is constantly making predictions about what's going to happen next, and those predictions shape your experience of reality. Let's imagine you're walking in the woods at dusk, and you see something long and curved on the path ahead. Your visual cortex processes the shape, the color, the context. It could be a stick. It could be a snake. Your brain quickly generates hypotheses and tests them against the visual data. If you're in an area where snakes are common, if you're anxious about snakes, your brain might interpret the ambiguous shape as a snake. Your amygdala fires, you feel fear, you jump back. Then you look more carefully and realize it's just a stick. False alarm. Your top-down expectations, shaped by fear, influenced your perception. But here's the fascinating part. For a brief moment, you really did see a snake. Not just thought you saw one, but actually perceived one. Your brain constructed that perception, that reality, based on incomplete information and prior expectations. Only after more careful analysis did it correct the mistake. This isn't a failure of perception. It's a feature. In the evolutionary past, mistaking a stick for a snake might startle you unnecessarily, but mistaking a snake for a stick could kill you. Better to overreact than underreact. Your brain is optimized for survival, not accuracy. This predictive processing happens all the time, in every sensory modality. When you read, you're not actually processing every letter. Your brain skips ahead, predicting what word comes next based on context, only dropping back to check the actual letters if the prediction fails. That's why typos are hard to catch in your own writing. Your brain knows what you meant to write, so that's what it sees, even if that's not what's on the page. When you listen to someone speak, you're constantly predicting the next word, the next idea. When the prediction is confirmed, you experience understanding. When it's violated, you experience surprise, confusion. This is why puns work. They set up one prediction, then deliver something unexpected but linguistically valid. Your brain experiences a pleasant jolt of surprise, unless the pun is terrible, in which case the jolt is less pleasant, though that's a matter of personal taste really. Let's slow down for a moment. Take a breath. Feel the air moving in and out of your lungs. That's your brainstem, quietly regulating your respiration, adjusting the depth and rate based on your blood oxygen levels, all without any input from your conscious mind. Information flowing from sensors in your blood vessels, to the respiratory centers in your brainstem, to the muscles of your diaphragm. All of it seamless, all of it automatic. You are a symphony of unconscious processes, with consciousness just the melody line floating on top. The information processing we're describing isn't serial, like an assembly line where each step completes before the next begins. It's massively parallel, with different brain regions working simultaneously on different aspects of the same problem. When you look at a face, your brain is simultaneously processing the features, the expression, the identity, the emotional context, the social implications. All of these are separate computational problems, solved by different neural circuits, then integrated into a unified perception. You don't experience the processing, you just experience the result. A face, recognized, understood, reacted to. This parallel processing is part of what makes brains so different from computers. A computer typically does one thing at a time, very fast. A brain does millions of things at once, relatively slowly. Each neuron fires at most a few hundred times per second, which is glacially slow compared to the billions of operations per second in a computer processor. But the brain compensates through sheer parallelism, billions of neurons all working simultaneously, creating a style of computation that's slow and messy, but remarkably robust and flexible. And here's something curious. The vast majority of this processing happens below the threshold of consciousness. You're not aware of your visual cortex extracting edges and colors from the light hitting your retina. You're not aware of your temporal lobes accessing word meanings from memory. You're not aware of your motor cortex calculating muscle commands. You're only aware of the final product, the thought, the perception, the action. Consciousness is the tip of the iceberg. Below it, in the dark, invisible even to itself, is the vast bulk of mental processing that makes consciousness possible. So information flows through your brain like water through a landscape, following channels carved by evolution and modified by experience, spreading out, pooling, rushing forward, always moving, never still. And somehow, from this flow emerges something that feels like you, like a self, like someone experiencing and deciding and acting. It's the most remarkable trick in the known universe, and it's happening in your head right now, quietly, gently, without any fanfare at all. Here's where things get truly fascinating. How does your brain take experiences, moments that happen and then vanish, and turn them into memories that can last a lifetime? How can you remember your first day of school, your grandmother's voice, the taste of your favorite childhood food. Where are these memories stored? And why do you forget where you put your keys 5 minutes ago but remember embarrassing moments from decades past? Memory is not a single thing. It's several different systems, working together and independently, each with its own rules, its own brain regions, its own quirks and limitations. When neuroscientists talk about memory, they're really talking about memories, plural, each type serving different purposes. Let's start with sensory memory, the briefest and most fleeting. Right now, as you read these words, your brain is holding on to sensory information for just a fraction of a second, just long enough to process it. Visual sensory memory lasts about half a second. Auditory sensory memory lasts a bit longer, maybe 3 or 4 seconds. This is why you can sometimes hear an echo of something just said, even if you weren't paying attention. The auditory information is still there, waiting to be processed if you choose to attend to it. Most sensory memory fades instantly, never reaching consciousness. But if something is important or interesting enough, it gets moved to short-term memory, also called working memory. This is your mental workspace, the scratch pad where you hold information temporarily while you think about it. When you read a phone number and hold it in your head long enough to dial, that's working memory. When you do mental math, when you follow the logic of an argument, when you hold on to the beginning of this sentence until you reach the end, that's all working memory. Working memory is limited, famously limited. Most people can hold about 7 items in working memory at once, maybe a few more, maybe a few less. That's why phone numbers are 7 digits in most countries. That's why we chunk information into meaningful groups. It's easier to remember the sequence 1776 if you think of it as 1776 rather than 4 separate digits. Your brain naturally creates these chunks, these meaningful patterns, to work around working memory's limitations. And working memory is fragile. Get distracted, even for a moment, and the information vanishes. You walk into a room to get something, someone asks you a question, and suddenly, you have no idea why you came in here. The fragile contents of working memory, disrupted by a new thought, are simply gone. This isn't failure. This is working memory, working as designed. Temporary storage that gets overwritten constantly to make room for new information. If information in working memory is important enough, if you rehearse it or think about it or attach emotion to it, it might get consolidated into long-term memory. This is the type of memory people usually mean when they talk about remembering. Long-term memory has essentially unlimited capacity. You can't fill up your long-term memory. You will never run out of space for new memories, though you might have trouble accessing them. Long-term memory itself divides into categories. There's explicit memory, the things you know that you know, facts, events, personal experiences. This is the memory you use when someone asks, "What did you do last weekend?" Or, "What's the capital of France?" You consciously, deliberately retrieve the information. Explicit memory further divides into episodic memory and semantic memory. Episodic memory is your personal history, your autobiography. The memory of your 10th birthday party, of what you ate for breakfast yesterday, of reading these words right now. These are episodic memories, specific events situated in time and place. Semantic memory is your general knowledge about the world. You know that Paris is the capital of France, that water freezes at 0 degrees Celsius, that dogs bark and cats meow. These are facts divorced from specific experiences. You probably don't remember when or how you learned them. They just are. Then there's implicit memory, the things you know without knowing you know them. Skills, habits, conditioned responses. When you ride a bike, tie your shoes, type on a keyboard, you're using implicit memory. You can't really explain how you do these things. If someone who has never ridden a bike asks you how, you'll probably say something useless like, "You just balance and pedal." The knowledge is there, but it's not accessible to conscious introspection. It's stored not as facts, but as patterns of activation, as connections between neurons that make certain actions feel natural, automatic. The creation of long-term memories happens primarily in the hippocampus, that seahorse-shaped structure deep in your temporal lobes. The hippocampus acts as a kind of filing clerk, taking experiences and encoding them, creating the neural patterns that represent memories. But the memories themselves aren't stored in the hippocampus. They're distributed throughout the cortex, encoded as patterns of connections between neurons. Here's how it works, as best we understand it. When you experience something, let's say you meet someone named Sarah at a party, different aspects of that experience get processed in different parts of your brain. The visual appearance of Sarah's face is processed in one region, the sound of her voice in another, the semantic information about her name in yet another, the emotional feeling of the interaction in another still. The hippocampus binds these separate pieces together, creating an index that links them all. When you later remember Sarah, your hippocampus activates this index, which in turn reactivates all the separate components, and you experience the memory. This binding process takes time. Memories aren't instantly permanent. They need to be consolidated, a process that happens gradually, often during sleep. This is why cramming for a test and then immediately taking it can work reasonably well. But if you want to remember the information long term, you need spaced repetition, sleep, time for consolidation. Your brain needs to replay the neural patterns, strengthening the connections, moving the memories from fragile short-term encoding to robust long-term storage. And here's something remarkable. Every time you remember something, you change it slightly. Memory is not like playing back a video recording. It's more like telling a story, and each time you tell it, you add a little, omit a little, emphasize different details. The memory gets reconsolidated, and this reconsolidation can introduce errors, distortions. You can become completely confident of a memory that never actually happened, especially if you've imagined it vividly or heard others describe it. Your brain doesn't distinguish between memories of real events and memories of imagined events. They're all just patterns of neural activity. This reconstructive nature of memory is why eyewitness testimony is less reliable than people think. It's why therapists are cautious about recovered memories. It's why family members can have completely different recollections of the same event, and all be equally convinced they're right. Memory is not a record of the past. It's a story you tell yourself, based on fragments of the past, reconstructed in the present, influenced by your current goals and emotions and understanding. Some memories are more vivid, more detailed, more emotionally charged than others. These are called flashbulb memories, the memory of where you were when something shocking happened, like a major historical event or personal tragedy. People often believe these memories are more accurate because they feel so vivid. Research suggests otherwise. Flashbulb memories are just as susceptible to distortion as ordinary memories. They just feel more real, more important, so you're more confident about them, even when they're wrong. Emotion plays a huge role in memory formation. The amygdala, that almond-shaped structure involved in processing emotion, can enhance memory consolidation. Events that make you feel strongly, joy, fear, anger, surprise, are more likely to be remembered than neutral events. This makes evolutionary sense. Remembering threats, remembering rewards, remembering important social interactions. These are survival critical. Remembering what color socks you wore last Tuesday is not. This is also why stress and trauma can create particularly strong memories. The stress hormone cortisol, released during frightening or threatening situations, enhances memory consolidation. The memory gets burned in, vivid and persistent. This can be helpful. Remembering that snakes are dangerous after a close encounter will help you avoid them in the future. But it can also be harmful, leading to intrusive memories, flashbacks, post-traumatic stress. The same mechanism that helps you learn from danger can also trap you in remembered fear. Let's pause here. Take a breath. You don't need to remember all of this. You're not going to be tested, Just let it drift through your mind, these ideas about memory, about how your brain turns moments into lasting traces, about how the past lives on in patterns of connection between neurons. It's happening constantly, automatically, mostly without your awareness. Your brain is deciding right now which parts of this script are worth encoding and which parts can be safely forgotten. Trust it to know what matters. Forgetting, by the way, isn't failure. It's essential. If you remembered everything, every sensation, every thought, every moment, you'd be overwhelmed, paralyzed. There's a rare condition called hyperthymesia, where people remember nearly every day of their lives in extraordinary detail. You might think this would be wonderful. It's not. It's exhausting. The past is constantly intruding on the present. You can't let go of grudges, can't move past embarrassments, can't see the forest for the trees. Most memories are clutter. Forgetting is the brain's way of keeping your mental space tidy, making room for what matters. So your brain carefully curates your memories, keeping some, discarding others, reorganizing and updating constantly. You are not a static collection of past experiences. You are a dynamic process, always changing, always incorporating new information, always rewriting your story. And somehow, despite all this flux, you feel like you, continuous and coherent across time. That feeling of continuity is itself a construction, a story your brain tells you about yourself. But it's a good story, a necessary one. Without it, you'd be lost in an eternal present, with no past to learn from and no future to plan for. Your memories make you who you are, and who you are is a pattern in your brain, constantly shifting, never quite the same from one moment to the next, but continuous enough to feel real, stable enough to call yourself, quietly, softly, one memory at a time. And now we come to the deepest mystery, the question that has puzzled philosophers and scientists for centuries. What is consciousness? How does the physical brain, this lump of neurons and chemicals, create subjective experience? How do electrical impulses become the feeling of red, the taste of coffee, the ache of loneliness? This is called the hard problem of consciousness, and it's hard because it seems impossible. We can explain how the brain processes information, how it stores memories, how it controls the body. But we can't explain why any of this feels like anything. Why isn't the brain just a sophisticated zombie, processing inputs and producing outputs without any inner experience? Why is there something it is like to be you? Some scientists think consciousness is an illusion, a trick the brain plays on itself. They argue that there's no observer watching your thoughts, no little homunculus inside your head. There's just neural processing, and the feeling that there's a you experiencing it all is a side effect, an epiphenomenon with no causal power. You think you're making decisions, but really, your brain has already decided, and consciousness is just along for the ride, narrating actions after the fact and claiming credit. Others think consciousness is fundamental, that experience is baked into the universe at the most basic level, and brains just organize and amplify it. This view, called panpsychism, suggests that even electrons have some tiny spark of experience, and when you arrange trillions of particles in just the right way into a brain, you get human consciousness. It sounds mystical, but it's a serious philosophical position, taken seriously by serious thinkers. Most neuroscientists take a more pragmatic approach. They don't claim to solve the hard problem, but they do try to figure out the easy problems, which brain regions are active during conscious experience, what neural patterns correlate with awareness, what happens when consciousness fades. Easy is relative, of course. Even these questions are remarkably difficult. One thing we know is that consciousness seems to require certain brain regions. Damage to the cortex, particularly the frontal and parietal lobes, can reduce or eliminate consciousness. Damage to the brainstem can do the same, even if the cortex is intact. This suggests that consciousness isn't localized to one spot. It's a network phenomenon, arising from interactions between multiple regions. There's a structure called the thalamus that seems particularly important. The thalamus acts as a relay station, channeling information from sensory regions to the cortex. Some theories suggest that consciousness arises from loops of activity between the thalamus and cortex, information circulating and reverberating, creating the ongoing stream of experience. When these loops are disrupted by anesthesia, by sleep, by coma, consciousness fades. Anesthesia is fascinating from a consciousness perspective. General anesthetics don't just make you unconscious. They seem to disrupt the brain's ability to integrate information. Different parts of your brain continue to function, but they stop talking to each other effectively. The result is that consciousness vanishes. You don't sleep. You don't dream. You simply cease to exist for a period, and then you're back, with no memory of the gap. It's the closest thing to death most people experience, and it's utterly mundane. A routine medical procedure performed thousands of times a day. But philosophically, it's extraordinary. What does it mean that consciousness can be turned off and on like a light switch? Sleep is different. During sleep, you don't become unconscious in the same way. You still experience things, dreams, sensations, vague awareness. Your brain is active, reorganizing memories, consolidating learning, performing maintenance. But the quality of consciousness changes. You're less self-aware, less logical, more accepting of absurdity. In dreams, you can fly, you can talk to dead relatives, you can be simultaneously yourself and someone else, and none of this strikes you as odd until you wake up. REM sleep, the stage where most vivid dreams occur, shows brain activity remarkably similar to waking. Your cortex is active, your brain consuming nearly as much energy as when awake. But you're paralyzed, your muscles shut down to prevent you from acting out your dreams. And your frontal lobes, those regions responsible for logic and self-awareness, are less active. This might explain why dreams are so bizarre. The parts of your brain that normally reality check your experiences are offline, so you simply accept whatever your brain presents. The content of consciousness, what you're aware of at any moment, is constantly shifting. Right now, you're aware of these words, but you could shift your attention to the feeling of your body, the sounds around you, your own breathing. Each shift brings different contents into consciousness. What determines what you're aware of? Attention, certainly, but also salience, emotional relevance, unexpectedness. Your brain is constantly filtering, deciding what deserves the spotlight of awareness and what can remain in the dark. Interestingly, you can only be consciously aware of a small fraction of what your brain is processing. Most mental activity is unconscious. You're not aware of your visual cortex extracting edges and colors, your cerebellum coordinating your movements, your hippocampus indexing your memories. These processes happen in the dark, below the threshold of awareness, and you only experience the final product. Consciousness is a narrow beam, illuminating only the results of vast, unconscious computation. There's a theory, called global workspace theory, that suggests consciousness is like a bright spotlight on a dark stage. Unconscious processes compete for access to this spotlight, and whatever wins, whatever is most relevant, most urgent, most surprising, enters consciousness and gets broadcast throughout the brain, allowing different systems to coordinate their responses. Consciousness, in this view, is a way of solving the problem of integration, of getting different specialized brain modules to work together on the same problem. Another theory, integrated information theory, suggests that consciousness is all about integration. Specifically, it's about how much information a system integrates into a unified whole. A simple system might process lots of information, but keep it separate, modular. A complex system like a brain integrates information, creating patterns that are more than the sum of their parts. The theory even proposes a measure of consciousness, called phi, quantifying how integrated a system is. High phi means high consciousness. Low phi means low consciousness or no consciousness at all. These theories are elegant, testable, but still incomplete. They might explain what correlates with consciousness, what physical arrangements give rise to it, but they don't quite explain why it feels like something to be conscious. They describe the structure of the bridge, but not the view from the bridge. Maybe we'll never solve the hard problem. Maybe subjective experience is fundamentally beyond the reach of objective science. Or maybe we're just at the beginning, and in a century or two, consciousness will seem as explicable as digestion or photosynthesis. It's impossible to know. The brain studying itself, trying to understand its own consciousness. It's like trying to see your own face without a mirror. Possible, but indirect, always mediated by tools and reflections. What we can say with reasonable confidence is that consciousness depends on the brain. Alter the brain with drugs, surgery, injury, disease, and consciousness alters too. There's no evidence for consciousness without a physical substrate. No ghosts, no souls, no mind separate from matter. Just matter arranged in extraordinarily complex ways, doing something we don't fully understand but can't deny. Experiencing, feeling, being aware. Right now, as you lie there, your brain is creating your consciousness. The dim awareness of these words, the background sense of your body, the vague thoughts drifting through your mind, all of it is the brain doing its thing. Neurons firing in patterns, giving rise to the inner light of experience. It's ordinary and miraculous, mundane and impossible, the most familiar thing in the world and the deepest mystery. So let that wash over you. Don't try to figure it out. Just appreciate it. You are consciousness, contemplating consciousness, through words written by consciousness, understood by consciousness. All of it matter thinking about itself. It's a strange loop, an infinite recursion, and it shouldn't work, but it does. Gently, quietly, here in the dark behind your eyes. Your changing brain. Here's something that might surprise you. The brain you have today is not the brain you had yesterday, literally. At the microscopic level, your brain is constantly changing, constantly rewiring itself based on your experiences, your thoughts, your actions. This capacity for change is called neuroplasticity, and it's one of the brain's most remarkable features. For a long time, scientists believed the adult brain was essentially fixed. You were born with all the neurons you'd ever have, and as you aged, you lost them gradually, with no way to replace them or meaningfully reorganize them. Your brain was like a house built in childhood. You could rearrange the furniture, but you couldn't renovate or add new rooms. This view dominated neuroscience for most of the 20th century. It was wrong. The brain is plastic, changeable throughout life. When you learn something new, your brain physically changes. Neurons form new connections, strengthen existing ones, prune away unused ones. The patterns of connection that represent your memories, your skills, your habits. These patterns are dynamic, always shifting, never static. You are literally not the same person you were a year ago, not just metaphorically, but physically, neurologically. Your brain has reorganized itself based on your experiences. Let's talk about how this works. When neurons fire together repeatedly, when two neurons are consistently active at the same time, the connection between them strengthens. This is summarized in a famous phrase in neuroscience. Neurons that fire together wire together. The strengthening happens through various mechanisms. The receiving neuron might develop more receptors for neurotransmitters. The sending neuron might release more neurotransmitters. New connections might form, or existing ones might grow larger, more efficient. This strengthening of connections is the physical basis of learning. When you practice a skill, playing an instrument, speaking a language, solving math problems, you're strengthening the neural pathways involved in that skill. At first, the activity feels effortful, conscious, clunky. You have to think about each step. But with practice, the pathways become more efficient, more automatic. The skill becomes second nature, requiring less conscious attention. This is neuroplasticity in action. The reverse is also true. Connections that aren't used weaken and eventually disappear. Use it or lose it applies to the brain just as it does to muscles. If you stop practicing a skill, the neural pathways supporting that skill will gradually weaken. This isn't failure, it's efficiency. Your brain has limited resources, energy, space, molecular machinery, and it prioritizes the connections that are actually being used. Unused connections are pruned away, freeing up resources for more relevant skills and memories. This pruning is particularly dramatic in childhood and adolescence. Young children have far more neural connections than adults. Their brains are exuberantly connected, ready to learn anything, adapted to nothing specific. As they grow and learn, their experiences shape their brains. Connections that are reinforced through repeated use, through importance, through emotional salience, are strengthened and retained. Connections that aren't used are pruned away. By adulthood, you have fewer connections than you did as a child, but the ones you have are more efficient, more specialized, more suited to your particular life and environment. This is why early experiences matter so much. The brain's plasticity is highest in childhood. The connections being formed and pruned during those early years shape the basic architecture of your brain, influencing everything that comes after. Language, social skills, emotional regulation, these are all laid down early, and while they can be modified later, the early patterns persist. A child raised in a loving, stimulating environment develops different neural patterns than a child raised in neglect or trauma. The brain adapts to its environment, for better or worse. But plasticity doesn't stop in childhood. The adult brain remains capable of change, just at a slower pace. You can learn new languages, new skills, new ways of thinking at any age. It might take longer, require more effort, but it's entirely possible. Your brain will reorganize itself to accommodate the new learning, forming new pathways, strengthening relevant connections, integrating new information into existing networks. There's even evidence of neurogenesis, the formation of new neurons, in the adult brain, particularly in the hippocampus. For decades, scientists believed this was impossible. Neurons were thought to be irreplaceable. You had all you'd ever have at birth, and any that died were simply lost. But research in the 1990s and 2000s showed that the hippocampus continues to generate new neurons throughout life, though at a much slower rate than in development. These new neurons integrate into existing circuits and contribute to learning and memory. Exercise, learning, and enriched environments all boost neurogenesis. Chronic stress and depression suppress it. Neuroplasticity is why rehabilitation works after brain injury. If a stroke damages part of your motor cortex, making it difficult to move your arm, intensive physical therapy can help. Not because the damaged neurons recover, they don't, but because other parts of your brain can take over some of the lost function. Nearby regions reorganize, forming new connections, assuming new responsibilities. The brain finds workarounds, alternate routes to accomplish the same goals. It's not perfect, it's not always complete, but it's often remarkable. This reorganization can happen even when entire sensory systems are missing. People born blind often have enhanced hearing and touch, but it's not just that their other senses compensate. Brain imaging shows that their visual cortex, the part that would normally process sight, gets recruited for processing sound and touch. The brain doesn't let valuable cortical real estate sit idle. If visual information isn't coming in, the visual cortex will process something else. The brain is pragmatic, opportunistic, making use of whatever resources it has. There are limits to plasticity, of course. Some types of learning are easier early in life. Language is the classic example. Children pick up languages effortlessly, achieving native-like fluency with little formal instruction. Adults struggle, rarely achieving the same level of fluency, always retaining an accent. This isn't because adults can't learn, it's because the brain's language systems become increasingly specialized and less flexible with age. The neural pathways are already committed, already optimized for specific languages, and reorganizing them is difficult. Similarly, certain types of sensory and motor learning have critical periods. If visual input is blocked during early development, say by cataracts, and then restored later, the person may never develop normal vision, even though their eyes work fine. The visual cortex missed its critical period for learning to see, and later restoration of input can't fully compensate. The brain's plasticity is time-sensitive, most flexible when you're young, more constrained as you age. But constrained doesn't mean absent. The aging brain remains plastic, capable of change and adaptation, learning new things, staying mentally active, maintaining social connections. These all promote healthy brain aging and preserve cognitive function. There's a concept called cognitive reserve, the idea that a brain with more education, more learning, more complex neural networks is better able to withstand damage and aging. It's like having multiple paths to the same destination. If one gets blocked, you have alternatives. People with high cognitive reserve may develop the same brain pathology, the plaques and tangles of Alzheimer's, for example, but show fewer symptoms because their brains can compensate more effectively. So neuroplasticity is both a scientific fact and a hopeful message. Your brain isn't fixed. You're not stuck with the patterns you have. Through effort, through practice, through experience, you can change your brain, and therefore change yourself. Bad habits can be unlearned. New skills can be acquired. Traumatic memories can be processed and integrated. The pathways in your brain are like trails through a forest. The more you walk them, the clearer they become. But if you stop walking them and blaze new trails instead, the old ones will gradually fade. It's effortful, certainly. Change takes time, repetition, patience. But it's possible. Always possible. Your brain is on your side, ready to adapt, ready to learn, ready to reorganize itself in service of whatever you ask of it. Slowly, gently, one connection at a time. Let's trace the brain's journey through life, from its earliest beginnings to its final years. It's a story of growth, refinement, stability, and eventual decline. Each stage with its own characteristics, its own challenges, its own remarkable adaptations. The brain begins forming just a few weeks after conception. A tiny sheet of cells folds in on itself, creating a neural tube that will become the brain and spinal cord. From this simple structure, billions of neurons are born, migrating to their designated locations, following chemical signals to their final destinations. It's a process of astounding complexity, and it happens mostly right, most of the time, without any conscious oversight. The developing brain bootstraps itself into existence, following a genetic program refined over millions of years. By birth, a baby's brain has most of its neurons, about 86 billion, roughly the same number as an adult. But the connections between them are sparse. A newborn's brain is like a city with buildings, but few roads connecting them. Over the first few years of life, those connections form at an extraordinary rate. A 2-year-old has more synapses than an adult, an exuberance of connectivity that allows for incredible learning, but also incredible energy consumption. Young children's brains use a disproportionate amount of the body's energy, which is why they need so much food and sleep. Growing a brain is metabolically expensive. Early childhood is a time of unparalleled learning. Language, motor skills, social understanding. All of these develop rapidly, shaped by experience and interaction. The brain is maximally plastic during these years, ready to absorb whatever the environment offers. This is both opportunity and vulnerability. A rich, stimulating environment promotes healthy brain development. Neglect, trauma, or deprivation can have lasting effects, shaping neural architecture in ways that persist into adulthood. Adolescence brings another wave of brain development, particularly in the frontal lobes. This is when executive function, planning, decision-making, impulse control, matures. But it's a slow process, extending well into the 20s. Teenagers have adult-sized brains, but with disproportionately developed emotional systems and still maturing control systems. The limbic system, which processes emotion and reward, develops earlier than the frontal lobes that regulate impulses. This mismatch explains a lot about teenage behavior. They're not being irrational on purpose. Their brains are caught between systems, driven by emotion and reward, before the control systems are fully online. The adolescent brain is also highly plastic, undergoing significant reorganization. This is the last major wave of synaptic pruning, where unused connections are eliminated and important ones are strengthened. The brain becomes more efficient, more specialized, better adapted to the specific demands of the adolescent's environment. This plasticity makes adolescence both a time of great potential and great vulnerability. It's when many mental health issues first emerge: depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, perhaps because the brain's reorganization sometimes goes awry. Young adulthood, from the late 20s through the 40s, is the brain's peak. Cognitive abilities are at their highest. The brain is fully mature, efficiently organized, capable of complex thought, creative problem-solving, and sustained attention. This is when most people do their best work, whatever that work may be. The brain has learned enough to be competent, but hasn't yet begun to decline. It's a golden period, though it passes mostly without appreciation, because you don't realize you're in it until it's over. But nothing lasts forever. Middle age brings the first subtle signs of cognitive decline. Processing speed slows. Working memory becomes less reliable. Names become harder to recall. These changes are normal, not signs of disease, just the inevitable effects of aging. Neurons become less efficient. Connections weaken. Some neurons die and aren't replaced. The brain, like the rest of the body, wears down with use. Interestingly, not all. Cognitive abilities decline at the same rate. Some, like vocabulary and general knowledge, remain stable or even improve with age. Older adults know more words, have broader knowledge, better judgment in certain domains. What they lose in speed and working memory, they partly compensate for with experience and wisdom. The brain adapts, relying on different strategies, leaning on strengths to compensate for weaknesses. Older age brings more pronounced changes. The brain physically shrinks, losing volume. The ventricles, fluid-filled spaces in the brain, expand. The cortex thins. Some of this is normal aging. Some of it, in some people, is the beginning of dementia, a pathological decline beyond normal aging. Alzheimer's disease, the most common form of dementia, involves the accumulation of abnormal proteins, amyloid plaques and tau tangles, that disrupt neural function and eventually kill neurons. Memory fades first, particularly the ability to form new memories, as the hippocampus is among the first regions affected. Gradually, other cognitive functions decline. Personality changes. Language deteriorates. In the final stages, even basic functions like swallowing and walking are lost. It's a cruel disease, robbing people of their minds while their bodies remain relatively intact. And we still don't have a cure, despite decades of research. We can slow the progression slightly with medications. We can provide support and care, but we can't reverse it, can't stop it. The brain, that extraordinary organ, proves vulnerable in the end. Not everyone develops dementia, of course. Many people remain cognitively sharp well into their 80s and 90s. What protects them? Genetics play a role, so does lifestyle. Physical exercise, mental activity, social engagement, healthy diet, all of these seem to promote healthy brain aging. They don't guarantee you'll avoid decline, but they improve the odds. The brain, even in old age, responds to how you treat it. And here's something hopeful. Even the aging brain retains some plasticity. Older adults can still learn, still form new memories, still adapt to new situations. It takes longer, requires more effort, but it's possible. The brain doesn't give up. It keeps trying, keeps compensating, keeps making the best of whatever resources remain. That's resilience, persistence, the refusal to simply fade away without a fight. So the brain's journey through life is one of constant change, from explosive growth in infancy, to refinement in childhood, to reorganization in adolescence, to peak performance in young adulthood, to gradual decline in old age. Each stage has its own character, its own gifts and challenges. The brain you have at 70 is not the brain you had at 7 or 17 or 30. It's adapted, specialized, shaped by decades of experience. It carries the marks of your life, the scars and triumphs, the learning and forgetting, all encoded in patterns of connection too complex to fully comprehend. And yet it's still you, still continuous, still the same mind that's been with you since the beginning, watching from behind your eyes, experiencing your life, being conscious. The brain changes, but somehow you remain. That's the paradox and the miracle. You are not a fixed thing. You're a process, a pattern, a story being told by your brain to itself, changing chapter by chapter, but somehow always recognizable as yours, slowly, gently, from beginning to end. We've mapped its structure, traced its connections, identified the functions of different regions. We've figured out how neurons communicate, how memories form, how sensory information gets processed. We've developed treatments for brain disorders, technologies to image the living brain, theories to explain consciousness. It's been an extraordinary journey of discovery, and yet we're still largely in the dark. The brain remains the most complex object we know of in the universe. More complex than any star, any galaxy, any structure ever built by humans. We can put a human on the moon, split atoms, sequence genomes, but we still can't fully explain how your brain allows you to experience the color blue, to fall in love, to write a poem. There are profound gaps in our understanding, deep questions we've barely begun to answer. One of the biggest mysteries is the one we touched on earlier: consciousness. We can describe its neural correlates, the brain activity that accompanies conscious experience, but we can't explain why that activity feels like anything. Why does the brain create an inner world of experience? Why aren't we just sophisticated input-output machines, processing information and producing behavior without any inner life? Science has no answer. Not yet. Maybe never. Related to consciousness is the question of free will. Do you have it? It feels like you do. It feels like you make choices, deliberate decisions based on reasons and preferences. But neuroscience suggests that your brain makes decisions before you're consciously aware of them. In famous experiments, researchers can predict your choices from brain activity seconds before you report making the decision. If your brain has already decided, what role does your conscious experience of deciding play? Is free will an illusion? Are you just along for the ride, watching your brain do its thing and retroactively claiming credit? Some scientists and philosophers say yes, free will is an illusion. Others argue the experiments don't prove what they claim to prove, that there's still room for something like free will even in a deterministic brain. It's a debate that mixes neuroscience, philosophy, and deeply held intuitions about personal responsibility and agency. There's no consensus, no clear answer, just competing theories and endless argument. Another mystery: how does the brain generate language? We know the brain regions involved: Broca's area for speech production, Wernicke's area for comprehension, pathways connecting them. But we don't know how neurons implement the complex rules of grammar, how they map sounds to meanings, how they generate novel sentences you've never heard before but instantly understand. Language is uniquely human as far as we can tell. No other species has anything approaching the complexity and flexibility of human language. How did our brains evolve this capacity? What neural architecture makes it possible? We're still figuring it out. The same goes for creativity. What happens in the brain when you have a new idea, when you solve a problem in an unexpected way, when you create art or music? There's no creativity center, no single region responsible for innovation. It seems to involve many regions working together, particularly the default mode network, a set of brain regions active when you're not focused on external tasks, when your mind is wandering. This network may be important for combining ideas in novel ways, for thinking outside the box. But that's still vague, still incomplete. We don't really understand creativity, can't fully explain where ideas come from. Mental illness is another frontier. We've made progress, certainly. We have medications that help with depression, anxiety, schizophrenia. We have therapies that teach people to manage symptoms, to change thought patterns, to cope better. But we're still in the dark about fundamental mechanisms. What causes depression? It's not just low serotonin. That's an oversimplification. It involves complex changes across multiple brain systems, changes that vary from person to person. What causes schizophrenia? We think it involves disrupted connectivity, problems with how different brain regions communicate, but we don't fully understand it. Why do some people respond to treatment and others don't? We don't know. Mental illness is still largely a black box, full of unanswered questions. The relationship between brain and body is another area of active mystery. We're increasingly realizing that the brain doesn't operate in isolation. It's influenced by the gut microbiome, by the immune system, by hormones circulating in the blood. There's a gut-brain axis where bacteria in your intestines produce chemicals that affect your mood and cognition. There's immune-brain communication, where inflammation can alter brain function, potentially contributing to depression and other disorders. The brain is embedded in a body, influenced by processes we're only beginning to understand. And then there's the question of how brains differ from each other. No two brains are exactly alike. Yours is different from mine in countless, subtle ways, different patterns of connection, different sizes of various regions, different chemical balances. Some of these differences are genetic, some are due to experience, some are random, developmental noise. But we don't know which differences matter for behavior, for cognition, for personality. We can't look at a brain and predict much about the person it belonged to. The mapping from brain structure to mental function is still mostly opaque. Artificial intelligence raises new questions about the brain. We're building machines that can recognize faces, translate languages, play games at superhuman levels. But they don't work like brains. They use different algorithms, different architectures. So what does that tell us? Maybe the brain isn't the only way to implement intelligence. Maybe there are many paths to cognition, and biological neural networks are just one possibility. Or maybe current AI is missing something crucial, some principle that brains use but our machines don't. We don't know. It's an open question, fascinating and unsettling. There's also the mystery of neuroplasticity's limits. We know the brain can change, can reorganize, can adapt. But how much? Can you change your personality through willpower and practice? Can you rewire deeply ingrained emotional responses? Can you recover fully from severe brain injury? The answers seem to be sometimes, partially. It depends. We don't have clear principles predicting when plasticity will succeed and when it won't. Every brain is an experiment of one, responding to intervention in its own unpredictable way. And fundamentally, there's the question of emergence. How do billions of simple neurons, each just following local rules, collectively produce the richness of human thought and experience? How does complexity emerge from simplicity? How does quantity turn into quality? There's no single answer, no magic moment where neurons become mind. It's a gradual transition, a spectrum from simple reflexes to complex reasoning, and somewhere along that spectrum, something we recognize as consciousness appears. But where? And how? And why? These mysteries aren't failures of neuroscience. They're the frontier, the edge of knowledge where research is most exciting. Every answer generates new questions. Every discovery reveals new complexity. The brain has layers upon layers, each one deeper and stranger than the last, and we've only just begun to peel them back. So let these mysteries sit with you. Don't try to solve them. Just appreciate them. The brain is a wonder, and part of that wonder is how much we still don't understand. There's a beauty in the unknown, in the questions that remain, in the vastness of what's left to discover. The brain studying itself, trying to understand its own nature, it's an ambitious project, maybe an impossible one, but it's also uniquely human, uniquely noble. We wonder, we investigate, we never quite arrive at final answers, but we keep searching anyway, quietly, curiously, gently pushing back the darkness, one discovery at a time. Section 10. The brain and you. We've wandered through neurons and synapses, through memory and consciousness, through development and aging. We've explored mysteries and mechanisms, structures and functions. But let's come back now to something more personal, more immediate. Let's talk about your brain, the one in your head right now, reading these words, having thoughts about thoughts. Your brain is unique. Nobody else has one quite like it. Oh, the basic architecture is the same. You've got the same lobes, the same major structures, the same types of neurons as everyone else. But the details, the specific patterns of connection, the precise balance of chemicals, these are yours alone, shaped by your genes, your experiences, your choices. Your brain is a record of your life, written in the language of neural connectivity. Every memory you've formed has left a trace. Every skill you've learned has strengthened certain pathways and weakened others. Every emotion you felt has altered the balance of neurotransmitters, creating lasting changes in how your brain responds to similar situations in the future. You are not separate from your brain. You are your brain. Your thoughts, your personality, your sense of self. All of it is neural patterns playing out in 3 pounds of tissue. That might feel reductive, even disturbing. If you're just your brain, then what about your soul, your spirit, your essential you-ness? These are deep questions, philosophical and religious, beyond the scope of neuroscience. Science can describe how the brain works, how it creates experience, but it can't address questions of meaning, of purpose, of whether there's something more beyond the physical. That's for you to decide, based on your beliefs, your experiences, your own contemplation. What science can say is that your brain is extraordinary. It's the most complex object in the known universe, and it's yours. It's working right now, allowing you to understand these words, to consider ideas, to feel whatever you're feeling. It's regulating your heartbeat, your breathing, your digestion, all without any conscious effort from you. It's monitoring the world around you, filtering out the unimportant, bringing the important into your awareness. It's maintaining your sense of self, your continuity across time, your story about who you are. And it's capable of change. Whatever patterns you have now, whatever habits, whatever thoughts and feelings, these can be modified. Not easily, certainly. Neural patterns are stubborn, resistant to change, especially ones that have been reinforced for years. But they're not fixed. Through practice, through therapy, through deliberate effort, you can rewire your brain. You can create new patterns, weaken old ones. You can, in a very real sense, change who you are by changing your brain. This is both empowering and daunting. Empowering because it means you're not stuck, not trapped by your past, not determined by your current patterns. You have agency, capacity for change. Daunting because change requires effort, sustained over time, with no guarantee of success. Your brain will resist, preferring established patterns because they're efficient, familiar, safe. But with persistence, with patience, with self-compassion when you fail, change is possible. Think about your brain's journey so far, all the experiences that have shaped it, all the learning and forgetting, all the joy and pain. Your brain has adapted to all of it, incorporating each experience into its structure, becoming slightly different with each passing day. And it's not finished. Your brain will continue to change, continue to adapt, for as long as you live. The brain you have tomorrow will not be exactly the brain you have today. And that's okay. That's how it should be. You're not a fixed thing. You're a process, always becoming. So take care of your brain. Give it what it needs. Sleep. Really, sleep is crucial. The brain does essential maintenance during sleep, clearing out metabolic waste, consolidating memories, reorganizing connections. Chronic sleep deprivation is harmful in ways we're still cataloging. Exercise, too. Physical activity increases blood flow to the brain, promotes neurogenesis, releases chemicals that support neural health. Eating well, managing stress, maintaining social connections, all of these support brain health. And keep learning, keep challenging your brain with new experiences, new ideas, new skills. Neuroplasticity thrives on novelty. The brain adapts most vigorously when faced with something new, something it hasn't encountered before. Reading, traveling, learning a language, playing an instrument, engaging in deep conversation. All of these exercise your brain, keeping it flexible, maintaining cognitive reserve against future decline. But also, be kind to your brain. It's doing its best. When it makes mistakes, when you forget something, misunderstand something, make a bad decision, that's not failure. That's just a brain being a brain, imperfect and probabilistic, optimizing for usually good enough rather than perfect. Your brain evolved for survival in a very different environment than the one you live in now. It's trying to navigate modern life with ancient tools, and honestly, it's doing remarkably well considering. If your brain struggles, if you experience depression, anxiety, addiction, any mental health challenge, that's not weakness. It's not moral failure. It's a brain doing something other than what you want, something you can't simply will yourself out of. Seek help. Talk to professionals. Use the tools available: therapy, medication, lifestyle changes, social support. These aren't crutches. They're appropriate responses to brain-based challenges, no different from physical therapy for an injured joint or medication for diabetes. Your brain is physical, biological, subject to the same laws of chemistry and physics as everything else in the universe. But it's also the source of everything you experience, everything you care about, everyone you love. It's the organ that makes you human, that gives you the capacity for thought, for wonder, for connection. It's both ordinary, just cells, just chemicals, and extraordinary, the universe contemplating itself, matter aware of being matter. So appreciate your brain, marvel at it, take care of it, use it well. It's the only one you'll ever have, and it's responsible for everything that makes your life worth living. All your memories, all your loves, all your dreams and hopes and fears, they're all in there, encoded in patterns of connection, firing constantly, creating the ongoing movie of your life. And right now, this moment, your brain is here with me, in a sense. These words I wrote with my brain are being read by yours, neural patterns transferred across time and space, from my thoughts to yours. That's language, that's culture, that's what brains do. They reach out to other brains, connecting, communicating, creating shared meaning. You're not alone in your skull. Your brain exists in a web of brains, influenced by others, influencing in turn. So thank your brain. Quietly, gently. Thank it for all it does, seen and unseen, conscious and unconscious, every moment of every day. It never stops, never rests, never gives up. From your first breath to your last, your brain will be there, working, adapting, creating you moment by moment. It's quite something, truly, soft and slow and remarkable. Part 3. Closing sequence. What is the brain? It's the question that brought us here, whispered softly at the beginning like a curious child, asking what makes them think and feel and remember. And after wandering through neurons and synapses, memory and consciousness, neuroplasticity, and mysteries unsolved, we find ourselves gently circling back to where we began, still wondering. We've learned that the brain is a 3-pound universe of 86 billion neurons, communicating through electrical pulses and chemical signals, creating everything you experience, We've explored how memories form and fade, how consciousness emerges from matter, how the brain changes across a lifetime. We've discovered that you are your brain, that your thoughts and personality and sense of self are all patterns of neural activity, constantly shifting but somehow continuous. Maybe the brain doesn't have to be fully understood. Maybe it just is, a fundamental mystery wrapped in wrinkles, floating in darkness, creating light. Maybe that's the whole point. The universe doesn't need to conform to human expectations. It simply unfolds according to laws we're only beginning to grasp, and the brain is the part of the universe trying to understand itself. It's a strange loop, an infinite recursion, beautiful in its impossibility. So, with all of this in mind, are you still awake? If you are, I hope it's not because I was too interesting. Though if I was, well, at least you've learned a few things about the most remarkable organ in your body along the way. And if you're already halfway to dreamland, may your thoughts be filled with softly firing neurons and gently consolidating memories. Before you drift off completely, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Drop a comment and share. Are you perhaps a neuroscience student reviewing these concepts, or someone who just finds brains strangely relaxing? It's always such a joy to hear from this sleepy science community. If you found this gentle journey through the human brain relaxing or informative, or both, please do consider giving this video a like and subscribing to Sleepy Science Student. It's a small gesture that helps me keep bringing you more calming, curious content from the world of science and beyond. Your support means everything to this sleepy little channel. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the landscape of the mind. Sleep well, dream deep, and may your neurons fire in peaceful patterns. Remember, your brain has been taking care of you since before you were born, working quietly in the darkness, creating everything you are and everything you experience. Give it the rest it deserves. Let it consolidate tonight's thoughts, reorganize today's memories, prepare for tomorrow's wonders. And in some quiet way, know that as you drift off to sleep, your brain keeps working, never stopping, never resting completely, forever creating you, moment by moment by moment, slowly, gently, in the soft dark behind your eyes. Good night.